Hello, everyone. My name is Tadzima Dzima, and I am the Director of Communications at the Partnership for Economic Policy. Before we begin, I would like to briefly share some housekeeping points. We have French and English interpretation available. To listen in your preferred language, click Interpretation at the bottom of your screen and select the language you wish to hear. Later in the event, after the panel discussion, there will be a Q&A session. We invite you to ask questions to our presenters and panelists at any time during this event. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. If relevant, please identify the person for whom your question is intended. You are also free to use the chat box to communicate to all participants. Please keep in mind that this is a public session. So please, let's be courteous, remain on topic, and anyone who's being rude or sharing inappropriate content will be removed from this event. Please only click on links shared by participants you trust. And please be aware that we are recording this event and we'll share it on our YouTube channel and website. I am now going to hand over to Professor Jane Mariara, Executive Director of the Partnership for Economic Policy, to open today's event. Thank you. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tansi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of you joining us from across Africa and around the world. It's indeed my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event. We are very delighted to see so many colleagues here today, and we know many more are going to join us. And we have with us researchers, policymakers, practitioners from international development, and partners from civil society, and also the private sector. Not, of course, to mention that we do have with us resource persons in PEP, among others, including PEP staff. Your presence reflects the shared commitments we all bring to improving opportunities for young people across the continent. I would especially like to welcome and thank our partners at the Mastercard Foundation, and I know they are with us today, whose collaboration and support have been central to the work we are celebrating today. Thank you very much, our partners from Mastercard Foundation. Today's event has two important purposes, and I know you all know this. That's why you are here with us. First, we are here to celebrate the publication of the new book, Youth Employment Programs in Africa, edited by Professor Ramos Mabugu and Professor Lucas Ronconi. And the second one, we are here to officially launch our new open research repository that brings together the full body of evidence generated through the What Works for Youth Employment in Africa initiative. And it's really a very rich repository. We'll be seeing that in due course. There are two important additions to the knowledge. These are two very important additions to the knowledge base on youth employment, which we know is a real issue in Africa. And therefore, these resources will help us moving forward and help many as they reflect on what works best for youth employment in Africa. As many of you will know, What Works for Youth Employment in Africa was a 3-year partnership between PEP and the Mastercard Foundation, aligned with the Foundation's Young Africa Work strategy to expand dignified and fulfilling work for young Africans, particularly young women. Through this partnership, we as PEP supported teams of local researchers and policy stakeholders in 10 African countries, and all these countries are represented here today, to review national youth employment policies and programs from a gender-aware and evidence-based perspective. By examining what works, how systems function, and where the gaps lie, these country projects provided some of the clearest insights we have on how to strengthen the impact and coordination of youth employment efforts. The book we are launching today brings together 9 country-level policy reviews from the initiative, along with a cross-country synthesis authored by our editors, Professor Ramos Mabugu, Lucas Ronconi, and also George Davaros, who is also our PEP Director of Research. The book highlights recurring challenges, innovative practices, and lessons that can help shape more effective, scalable, and better targeted youth employment initiatives, of course, ranging from policies, strategies, and implementation. Later on in this webinar, I will introduce our second major contribution, our new online research repository that houses all publications and materials produced through this initiative. This free open access platform is designed to make the full evidence accessible to everyone working to advance youth employment in Africa. And we are very excited to share it with all of you, and we hope that you can also share it with others. We hope that these resources will serve as practical tools to deepen understanding, spark discussion, and inspire better policy and program designs across the continent, ultimately contributing to improve youth employment outcomes in Africa. Before we begin, let me outline today's program. We'll start with a presentation of the book by one of the co-editors, and also someone who played a very important role in the first phase of this project, Lucas Ronconi. This will be followed by a panel discussion with several of the book co-authors and project participants who reflect on priorities for advancing youth employment. We'll then open the floor to your questions. Finally, we will proceed to the launch of the new research repository, which I'll introduce along with a short demonstration video. With that, it is now my honor to officially open this webinar. I wish you all a productive and engaging session ahead. Now, as we begin our first session, I would again like to acknowledge the 2 editors of the book, Professor Ramos Mabugu and Professor Lucas Ronconi, who are both PEP research fellows and people who have played a very critical role in generating practically all the materials that we will be discussing today. Ramos is unfortunately unable to join us today, but he sends his warmest regards and takes great pride in having contributed to this important volume and to the broad initiative. We are delighted, however, to have you, Lucas Ronconi, with us. Lucas is a professor of economics at the Universidad de Buenos Aires, a PEP research fellow, and a long-standing PEP policy mentor. In addition to co-editing the volume, as I've already mentioned, and co-authoring 3 of its chapters, Lucas provided immense direction and support during the first year of the initiative, helping establish processes that enabled the country teams to advance the work effectively. And of course, thereafter in phase 2, he still played a critical role in mentorship and guiding teams through the working papers, through the publication of their papers, and also putting the volume together. It is now my great pleasure then to hand over to Lucas. So Lucas, again, thank you very much and welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, colleagues. It is an honor for me to be presenting this book. Let me start by thanking you, Jane, thanking Marjorie, John, and Jorge. Thank you for inviting me to collaborate and being part of this project. There are hundreds of people to thank. Allow me to focus on Ramos Mabugu, the co-editor of this book. This scholar has a very sharp mind and a very good heart. So thank you, Ramos. Allow me to share the presentation with you. As I said before, this is a collaborative effort. This book is the outcome of an effort of a large number of colleagues working in the public sector and NGOs and in the academia. So the objective here was to analyze youth employment programs for two main reasons. First, because there is a lack of fulfilling jobs for a growing population in the continent. And so, well, one partial solution to that are public policies such as youth employment programs. And when we went to analyze those policies, we realized that there is very little knowledge about what works, what doesn't work. So that's the main reason we decided to focus on this issue. In the book, we have the summary of themes, but there are some extra also on this issue. And we went to study youth employment programs. We decided to take an interdisciplinary approach. This is what you will find in the book. These are colleagues with different backgrounds: economics, political science, sociology, public administration, from different perspectives, looking at youth employment.
Lucas, are you mute or is it me who cannot hear you?
Apologize. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Apologize
Yes.
for the interruption. There was a shutdown on the energy here at home. That's the reason for that. So apologize for that. So what I was trying to say was that we took an interdisciplinary approach because the complexity of lack of fulfilling opportunities for youth and public policies to deal with those issues is really, there is not a single cause for the problems. You have to take a multidisciplinary approach, look it from different perspectives. And so that's what you will find in this book. I am not going to go through all the details because I don't want to spoil you the pleasure of reading the book, but let me focus on a few key findings which I think are useful to give a flavor of the kind of things you will find in the book. So I try to summarize the key findings in 3 points. Let me start taking a positive or a more positive perspective. So in most African countries, youth employment programs are a relatively new intervention. Most programs have 5, 10 years of existence. In many countries, the first youth employment programs were introduced about 20 years ago. So there is what I would like to take from this is that there is room for learning. When you start doing something new, you sometimes make some mistakes. The idea is not to repeat those mistakes. So compared to other continents which have been implementing youth employment programs for a longer time, this is something relatively new. The other thing is that when you look to how much African countries, or at least the ones that are analyzed in the book, how much they spend on youth employment programs as a share of GDP. You have to do a lot of back of the envelope calculations to get to these numbers, but it's basically around 1/3 of a percentage point of GDP, which is relatively low compared to other countries. It's hard to have good data about these issues, but for example, in OECD countries, they usually spend around 1 percentage point. So there is room to spend more on these programs, at least from a relative perspective. Now, if you want to put more money into these programs, you want to make sure that they go to the right people and they are efficiently and effectively used. So, and so far, there is anecdotal evidence and some more rigorous evidence that youth employment programs have been helping many youth, but mostly in the short term. Let me now spend the last few minutes trying to focus on those things that need to improve. The first point I would like to emphasize is that, again, with variation across programs within countries or variation across countries, but in general, you can say that there is poor targeting of youth employment programs on the vulnerable youth in the region. The graph on the screen basically shows you what share of expenditure on active labor programs, which include youth employment programs, but it's a little bit of a broader definition, what percentage of that money go to people in the poorest quintile. So if you spend $100 in youth employment programs, and 20% of those dollars go to the poorest quintile, that means that your program is neutral, is neither progressive nor regressive. What you usually want to do is to give to the poorest quintile, to the poorest 20% of the youth. You would like them to receive a bit more than 20% of the money. Well, in the graph, you see that in Latin America, the continent where I have been working for the last 30 years on employment programs, less than 15 out of $100 go to the poorest 20% of the population. So we have a regressive social expenditure in this area. What for sub-Saharan Africa, regrettably, the situation is a little bit better than in Latin America, but still the poorest quintile receive the youth employment programs and active labor programs more in general are regressive. The poorest are receiving very little out of that. We also have here information about Asia and Eastern Europe, and you see that the opposite happens. A larger share of the money goes to people in the poorest quintile. So that's one area where we definitely need to improve. Why is that very poor targeting? Well, there are many reasons. Let me simply mention two of them. One is that we learn in this book, when we talk with youth, particularly with vulnerable youth, many of them were not aware at all about the existence of youth employment programs. In some cases, youth employment programs, only youth who live in urban areas or with a relatively high level of education are aware of those programs. But well, those are not the most vulnerable. And also, that something that brings a little bit of concern, some of the people who do not participate or some of them express some feelings of exclusion. For example, in some cases, because they are not part of a political network. So these are important things that need to improve. The final point that I would like to make is that we found that many programs in the region still have very little evaluation and there is very little coordination across programs. So, just to give an example, there are some youth employment programs where researchers try to get the basic information about how it was implemented, and there is not even the very basic information about that. Those kind of things need to improve. If at the end of the day we want to have youth employment programs as an effective tool to somehow improve the quality of life of the youth in the continent, we need to evaluate. We need to know what works and what is not working. So there are areas where even improving access to basic information is quite important. But the other important issue, and this is the last point I would like to make, the other important issue is that in many cases we found that there are several programs running in the same country. Sometimes they are part of the same ministry, such as the Ministry of Labor, or some parts they are part of different ministries within the same government. However, and some are about giving skills, others are about increasing the demand for labor, others are more about entrepreneurial skills or different type of skills. And you will expect, ideally, you will expect a bit more of coordination among either civil servants, policymakers working in these programs, and ideally to have also members of civil society as part of that coordinating table. However, we found that many of these efforts, many of these initiatives, many of these programs are like islands who do not communicate with each other. And that overall, that reduces the quality and the effectiveness of youth employment programs. So thank you very much. Allow me to stop here.
Thank you so much, Lucas, for that excellent presentation. We've heard some powerful insights from the book. And now we'll turn to our panel discussion, challenges ahead and priorities for moving forward. And I'm delighted to be joined by our panelists who all contributed to the book. Lucas, who you have already met as the co-editor of the book, and who has already been introduced by Jane. Just as a recap, in case you joined a little late, he is a PEP policy mentor and research fellow and professor of economics at Universidad de Buenos Aires. Sorry, my Spanish is not as great as yours, Lucas. Then we have Henry Sebukira. He's a technical advisor on fiscal policy at Uganda's Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. He also coordinates the implementation of public investment management reforms as the manager of the project development and investment planning at the Uganda National Planning Authority. And then we have Tembehihle Makubela. She is based in South Africa and is a researcher and policy analyst. She is also the communications officer at Hand in Hand, Southern Africa, a nonprofit organization working to alleviate poverty through job creation. We have Lisan Meles, is a data analyst from Ethiopia. She's a monitoring and evaluation specialist at Addis Ababa Revenue Bureau. So during this discussion, our panel will share what their findings mean for the future and how we can move from evidence to action for dignified and fulfilling youth employment outcomes in Africa. So we are going to now jump into our panel discussion. I just want to make sure that all of our panelists have got their videos on for this session, as we are going to be calling upon our panelists to chime in and into the discussion. So it will be great to see your faces, your handsome and beautiful faces, please. Thank you very much. Really excited. So we're gonna start with, focusing, there's a lot that's, within this book. And one thing that we really wanna look at is the aspect of coordination and policy coherence. And in almost all the policy reviews, poor coordination of youth employment programs is highlighted as a central issue, limiting their impact. From your perspectives, what are the biggest barriers to coordination across government and institutions? And have you seen any promising approaches to address them? I will direct this particular question to Lisan Meles.
Thank you for the question. From my observation, several key factors weaken the coordination between government institutions. First, there is no single institution that has mandate to coordinate youth employment programs. So different programs designed and implemented in fragmented approach. Second, there is no unified monitoring and evaluation system. So each institution assess their output, and there is no mechanism to assess and evaluate the collective impact of programs and identified gaps. The other problem is lack of a structured platform for data and information sharing. So this affects both the design and execution of programs. So this affects this cases misalignment between programs and duplication of effects, as well as waste of resources. Finally, in Ethiopia especially, frequent restructuring of institutions further weaken coordination between institutions, because some institutions merge, some split, so this change their mandate frequently and makes coordination weak. Despite this challenge, I have seen some promising improvements. For instance, Ministry of Labor and Skills launched a labor market information system. This system is implemented about 35 countries in Africa, even though the functionality is limited. The other promising approach is the committee that was formed by the Prime Minister in Ethiopia, which called National Employment Committee, that comprises different ministries, institutions, and regional offices. So these are promising beginnings.
Thank you so much, Lisan, for providing that detailed breakdown of coordination barriers and identifying that multi-sectoral fragmentation. I will now pass it on to Tembekile. There is fragmented governmental mandates and frequent leadership challenges, which are also proving to be a challenge in South Africa. Is the country taking similar approaches to address these?
Well, in South Africa, we have a similar challenge, as you've already mentioned, but we do have the national management pathway, where you find that there is an effort to put together data for youth employment projects. It's an effort to coordinate the efforts towards mitigating the issue of youth employment. But of course, data is still quite fragmented. So you find that maybe you get information on the educational ministry or on the presidential youth employment initiatives, but you don't get a robust view of all the employment initiatives that are out there. And then some of the information has gaps. So you may find there's information on, and I think Lucas had also mentioned it earlier, that you find that there's just these gaps in information, in critical information that will actually determine decisions, like to scale the current initiatives, like in terms of the coordination, like, okay, can we scale this initiative based on the information that we have? And you find that the information actually is not there because of a lack of coordination between the different ministries.
Great. Thank you for adding insight on the critical barriers of weak vertical coordination. That's very insightful. Just for an additional view to this, Henry, in your experience, how does the silo approach prevent the integration of information systems and planning that both Lisan and Tembekile have called for?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, the silo approach has been one of the main constraints, actually, to coordination of youth employment interventions for Uganda. Many ministries have various roles that they have to play, but each of them works without consideration of the interventions that are being implemented by the institutions. So you will find the Ministry of Gender that has the mandate to coordinate employment programs for youth is actually not the ministry that is supposed to create the jobs. You find the Ministry of Agriculture, ministries of industry, ministries in charge of, minerals, ministries in charge of infrastructure. These are the ministries that actually have employment programs, but as they implement job creation interventions, they are not actually liaising with the ministry responsible for gender, labor, and social development. So you find that we have not had harmonization of interventions. And I think for Uganda going forward, this solution has been tackled using the approach to planning and budgeting, where we gather all responsible institutions implementing similar interventions within the same program to be able to harmonize their employment interventions. For example, employment now falls under the Human Capital Development Program. And within this program, we bring together all the responsible institutions responsible for the human capital development outcomes. Gender, responsible for labor being one of them, but also those other institutions responsible for other critical areas of health, education, and they also tap onto those other job creating institutions to be able to break the silo mentality. But what I could say in conclusion, that this is just the start. And we're still learning a lot from this programmatic approach to planning, budgeting, execution, and programming going forward. Thank you very much. Otherwise, the situation is not very different from South Africa, what I've heard from my colleague and elsewhere. But we keep learning, and for us, there's a lot of improvement going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Henry, for providing those solutions and examples from your own context as well, and showing that disjointedness of the silo approach or the mandate syndrome. That's very insightful. Lucas, how can funders and partners at the international level adapt their approach to support rather than hinder national coordination efforts?
Well, here there is also a problem of coordination and too many windows among donors, and that's sometimes we have an extra challenge at the national level to coordinate programs because they are funded by different donors and they do not coordinate actions either. So that is a problem there. So it is something very difficult, but something that we should work on, to have interministerial councils, interministerial meetings, to invite members of civil society, invite members of, for example, in the case of youth employment programs, at least some members of youth organizations, invite members of the academia. So by at least giving some voice, giving some power to civil society in policy making, that will help. That will help probably a little bit. That will help. So and ideally, members of international organizations should also be in that table. But this is a big challenge. You see that everywhere. we should work on that.
Great, thank you for sharing that cross-sectoral approach, which can help coordination efforts. We will focus now on a different aspect, which is creating lasting change. And many youth employment programs are born out of political urgency. And from stabilizing unrest to responding to unemployment crisis, but this often means quick fixes instead of lasting change. What would it take for youth employment policy in Africa to shift from reactive to strategic? This one I will ask Tembetlishe to provide some insight on.
Okay, thank you very much. So in terms of moving from being reactive to strategic, I think we can all agree that as we've conducted the research, we've seen that most of the youth employment policies will be quite short term. Maybe it will be a program that they are running for 6 months or 12 months or a pilot program. And therefore, we can't actually follow through and see the outcome through the youth individuals that are joining these programs to see what's actually going on. Are they being placed in long-term labor markets? Are they being placed in employment and training initiatives? So one of the things I think is quite important is that our economic policies should actually weave in youth employment across the sectors. So we should be actually looking at how can we create youth employment in agriculture? How can we create youth employment in industry? It shouldn't just be something that's a standalone social topic that we're trying to deal with in our governments, but it should rather be interwoven into all the sectors. And then another thing, also a long-term policy for youth enterprises, youth-led enterprises. Because the truth is that formal employment will not solve the problem for youth unemployment. So governments actually having long-term strategies to say, how can we invest in youth-led enterprises to see them thrive, to see them grow, and even entrepreneurship training, how to teach our youth to start their own businesses, to make their initiatives work. And then another thing that I think is quite important is data. I think Lucas pointed to that quite a lot, is that most of our initiatives are not data driven. So we don't really know, as we're implementing one thing, does it need to be scaled up? Is it actually working for the youth? Can it actually reach more people? I think when we look at I'll put it in the South African context, maybe a certain initiative is working in the Gauteng province and in the Western Cape, but can we scale it up to work in the more vulnerable areas? Because we find that most of our vulnerable youth are not even taking part. So even in our policy, we should be looking at how do we even localize the implementation of initiatives to actually bridge the gaps that youth are facing. Because you may find in the poorer areas or the marginalized areas, youth are struggling with transportation, youth are struggling with other social issues that hinder them from entering training and education. And therefore, it just continues the pattern of youth unemployment because they just stay home. I'll just give an example from our organization. We're currently running a program for teen mothers. And you find that most of the teen mothers are just not aware of opportunities that are out there for education. You find them dropping out of school and they are just stuck in that continuous cycle because the programs and the initiatives are not coming to their area to come and see what is hindering this specific group or this set of youth from entering into education, into training, and therefore into employment opportunities. So those are just a few I'd like to highlight. And then I think, yeah, it just goes back to data. So the data should inform the decisions of our government, should inform our strategy, our long-term strategy. And in between that strategy, we should have data-driven networks that help us track, is it working? What can we change? What can we improve so that youth employment will be at least reduced significantly? I don't know if we can eradicate it, but we can reduce it significantly. Thank you.
I love that, Timbetlihle. Just the way you responded to that, focusing on how data can inform strategy and, how you weaved in policy in that response really gave a lot of insights. Thank you so much for that. Lisan, Tembetlihle spoke about integrated strategies, but I believe you call for a standalone youth employment policy. Can you explain why a dedicated policy is crucial for creating the political commitment and the cross-sectoral integration needed for lasting change?
Thank you. That's a good point. Having a standalone use employment policy is very good to shift short-lived and reactive programs into more sustainable and long-term programs, because if we have a standalone use employment policy, programs will be evidence-based and they will have clear long-term goals and strategies. So this helps to make programs more sustainable and have long-term impacts.
Great, thank you so much. Lucas, the panel has outlined a number of policy and funding changes. Very briefly, in your view, what are the prerequisites for any of these strategic shifts to succeed?
Well, I have little to add to what my colleagues have already said, but allow me to simply say that what we need is policymakers that have a combination of people who respond to electoral incentives, which are in the very short run because we have elections every 3, 4, 5 years, with people with technical skills. That mix is ideal. We don't want purely technocratic, but we don't want an extreme of populism. We don't want, if everything is managed by electoral politics, then all our policies will have a very short-term horizon, because that's what politicians have, and that's wonderful on one hand, but it has some problems on the other. So what I will say is that let's try to find that mix between electoral politics to respond to the will of the population and people with more technical skills and a longer term horizon.
All right, I love that, because then that leads us to our next focus, which is evidence to action. And a key goal of this initiative is ensuring that data and evidence directly inform decisions, like what Tembelile shared earlier. And from your experience, what helps bridge the gap between research and policy in this field? I'm going to ask Henry to chime in on this one.
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. I think critical for us going forward on how we bridge the gap between research and policy. One is we need to champion for evidence-based planning and budgeting. Now, related to the previous question, actually, many of the plans for most of sub-Saharan Africa, and I will say Uganda not spared on this, are driven by the political manifestos of various, ruling parties of those countries. And most of these politicians actually make promises. Most of them, because they know the youth and the democratic dividend favors the youth more, make promises to the youth, sometimes which are not realistic, in form of data that is actually informing realistic, fiscally sustainable interventions. So what we need to do is to ensure that the plans that we're actually formulating for most of the countries are actually informed by adequate data, informed targeting, and we ensure that what the politicians are actually promising to the population and finally informing the planning is actually that which is affordable within the medium-term planning frameworks of the different countries. Two, we need to ensure that we have also action-oriented research and practical interventions. Now, we also have a detachment where we have purely academic research on many of the interventions that is actually not viable when it comes to actual implementation and the design of interventions. So we have unrealistic recommendations from a number of research interventions that actually cannot be afforded within the design of practical interventions. So how do we link research to actually be action-oriented and be that which informs the practical design of government intervention? So we need to bring the academia, research institutions, together with the designers of policy in the same room to ensure that actually they are designing, or the research is actually informing the design of practical actions. But overall, I would say that a number of countries have actually put in place legal policy reforms to ensure that we actually have an integration. And allow me to just step back a bit. An integration between the political wishes and the practical design of interventions. For example, in Uganda, we have what we call the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility. The Charter of Fiscal Responsibility requires every new government to submit a Charter of Fiscal Responsibility outlining its fiscal policy objectives for the term they are elected. And what is interesting in the legal framework is that this Charter of Fiscal Responsibility is expected to be consistent with the National Development Plan. So what is this helping us? It's ensuring that what the politicians are actually promising to the masses is that which can be achievable and sustainable within the national planning framework. So what we need to do is to ensure that we achieve research, informing development planning and budgeting, but also ensure that what actually civil society organizations are doing and other development partners is brought together in the same room with government and public interventions to have impact going forward. Thank you very much.
I love that, Henry. So in other words, you're saying we should stop building castles in the sky, and instead we must have evidence-based planning and budgeting by bringing different experts in the room who can inform realistic expectations. That's great feedback. Lisan, how does PEP's co-production model encourage ongoing collaboration between researchers and policymakers throughout the policy cycle?
One approach is making our research usable, relevant, and timely, so that policymakers can easily change it into action. So we have prepared policy briefs and clear roadmaps that shows the needed activities, recommendations, responsible bodies. So this makes policymakers easily use our evidence. Besides this, policymakers have been participated during our research in key informant interviews, also in meetings and research workshops. So this makes them easily take away the outputs of our research. So involving policymakers during the research process is very important. Also, collaboration between NGOs, communities helps, because NGOs have easy access to inform policymakers, and this is a good approach as well. And also, strengthening the skill of policymakers is important, because it improves their skill to interpret and apply research evidence. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. I will ask you later on to also just move a little bit closer to the mic. It was a little bit faded. I'm gonna pass this on to Tembelihle. Who else should researchers be working with? I know we've spoken a lot about the importance of rigorous research in order for us to build credibility and tailor communication to policy needs. Who else should researchers be working with from the project outset to make youth employment policy evidence more compelling for policymakers and donors?
Okay, I think it was kind of mentioned in the previous question, especially by Henry, that we need to work with government representatives who can actually make the decisions, and inform as we do the research and have the outcomes, they're able to then take it back to the decision makers. And then also working with, I think from my perspective, working with the people in the labor market, like employers, to also understand what are the needs in the labor market today. Because sometimes our skills programs and our initiatives may not actually match with the skills that are needed in the labor market today. So even as we are doing research and making up policies, it's important to also speak to the relevant labor market leaders to know, okay, what are the skills that are needed? What are job-rich sectors that can actually employ youth today? And work with those people to come up with great policies for youth employment.
Great, thank you so much. We are about to wrap up this part of this webinar, but as we are looking ahead, I'll ask each panelist to just, if you could set one priority for improving youth employment policy in Africa over the next 5 years, what would it be and why? Just a very short response from each one of you under 1 minute would be great. So I'll start with Henry.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very good question. And allow me to say, creating an enabling environment to create more gainful jobs is the one most important intervention we should do. We can talk about employability of the youth, the right skills and everything, but what the youth need are gainful jobs. So any intervention that creates a number of these jobs, several of these jobs, is what we need to do. For Uganda, I'll tell you, we have recognized this. And what have we done? We have developed the 10-fold growth strategy. We want to multiply our economy 10 times the size it is in the next 15 years. Why? Because we want to create as many jobs that can be made for our youth, gainful jobs in industry, in science, technology, and innovation, and very many other gainful areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We heard the birds whistling in the background. Shows that they are supporting you there, Henry, on that feedback. Tembekile, your thoughts?
Okay, I think in addition to what Henry has said, also creating a national youth labor market system, a system that can actually hold us accountable, collect the data, and also improve coordination for the youth employment policies and initiatives. So just having a system that collects all of this data, that is able to show all these opportunities to the youth, and that also is able to hold us accountable as a nation to say that, okay, are we moving forward with youth employment initiatives and policy?
Great, thank you. Lucas?
Again, allow me, I fully share the ideas of my colleagues. Simply allow me to say, I will put a bit of emphasis when it comes to youth employment programs on improving targeting. Let's improve targeting.
Great, thank you. And Lisan, over to you.
I would prioritize investing on entrepreneurship because the current economy can't generate sufficient formal employment for unemployed youth. So entrepreneurships help to address youth unemployment both in the supply and demand side. If we combine training, access to credit, and market linkage together, we can help youth to create or develop their own business and create job opportunity for other youth. So in the long run, this approach helps to shift the structure of economy from low productivity agriculture to more dynamic industries. So it will help us to tackle the root cause of unemployment, which is structural unemployment in Africa. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for all these very valuable insights that you've shared with us. These discussions remind us that youth employment is not only an economic priority, but a foundation for sustainable and equitable growth. And thank you again to our panelists for sharing their expertise. I'm sure our audience members will have many questions. I now invite you to please share these through the Zoom Q&A box as we move to the Q&A portion of the event. So I'm just gonna take a look at some of the questions that came in. One of them says, how do you account for the impact of culture on youth employment? For example, in Ethiopia, there are some otherwise profitable employment opportunities which society traditionally assigns to some lower class of society, and parents discourage their youth from engaging on them. For example, weaving, tannery, pottery, blacksmithing. Does the study come up with similar findings, and what can be the solution? This was asked by Getena Gobezi. Sorry if I don't get your name correctly, but I'll direct this one to Lisan. How do you account for the impact of culture on youth employment? Is, for example, in Ethiopia, there are some otherwise profitable employment opportunities which society traditionally assigns to some lower class of society, and parents discourage their youth or their children from engaging in them.
This is related to the formulation of programs. Inclusion of different youth groups is important. Our research highlighted and emphasized that inclusion of different youth groups, rural area youth, vulnerable youth, and community participation during the implementation of programs makes programs suitable for different cultures. So I emphasize the need to involve communities and different youth groups. So because one size fits approach doesn't work. So this way we can fix the problem.
And we also have a question that asks, what's an ideal solution to having dignified and fulfilling work according to the panelists? I will direct this one specifically to Henry. What's an ideal solution to having dignified and fulfilling work according to you? And are you involving the youth in the decision making as these policies and implementations affect the youth directly? This is Nicola Nkomo from Zimbabwe. Henry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that good question. Yes, I think what we need for the youth to have dignified work is we need these youth to have gainful jobs. Most of us and in most of our countries, we are not implementing the minimum wage, for example. And we have youth being paid below the minimum wage. So how do we have youth doing jobs for the right pay and for the right amount under the right conditions? Two, how do we have jobs that respect the human rights of all the youth? Jobs free, workspaces that are consistent with occupational health and safety standards, but are also consistent with the employment policies of the country. A number of countries have the employment laws. So jobs that are dignifying are those that are gainful for the youth. They are paid above the minimum wage or equal to the value of their productivity. And also those that respect the rights and dignity of the youth, irrespective of gender, age, nature of abilities, going forward. I thought that's my idea about that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Henry. We'll take one last question. The feedback we got is, I observed that many of the youth entrepreneurship interventions, interventions such as that target the real sectors like agriculture and manufacturing, but have neglected the service sector. This move has crippled many innovative and disruptive ideas of these youth. The few ones who struggled to push went to extinction due to inadequate support. What is your view about the biased support of youth employment interventions in the real sector than the service sector? Okay, so I'll repeat this question one last time for clarity. I observed that many of the youth entrepreneurship interventions target the real sectors like agriculture and manufacturing, but neglect the service sector. This move has crippled many innovative and disruptive ideas of the youth. The few ones who struggled to push went to extinction due to inadequate support. What is your view about the biased support of youth employment interventions in real sector than in service sector? I will pass this on to Tembi.
Okay, thank you so much. So in terms of this question, I don't know if I would probably need a bit more of the numbers, because I know that in South Africa, we do have our agri-SETA, we do have our services SETA sectors that do aim to help youth, whether they're in the services side or SETA side. But of course, it would not be good to have a one-sided support, because youth initiatives should be able to support youth with various ideas, with various innovative solutions to unemployment. So of course it would be crippling to youth, but from what I know, we do have, I mean, I'll speak maybe from a South African perspective, that we do have SETAs and also initiatives that do cater to youth in the services sector and youth that are more passionate in the agri and manufacturing sector. So I don't know if I fully agree with the person who's asking the question, but of course, all our youth in entrepreneurship in interventions should speak to the various sectors that youth want to be a part of. Because at the end of the day, the labor market has a gap for all youth. So it shouldn't just be youth should be just limited to agri or manufacturing. So yes, but I do believe that there are youth initiatives in the services sector.
Well, we still have lots of questions that we would have loved to answer. But unfortunately, our time is running out, and this was a rich discussion. I'm sure that maybe we should consider doing a part 2 to this, because there were lots of questions that we're not able to get to, but we love the engagement. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful contributions. This has been a really rich discussion, and we appreciate your engagement with the findings and reflections shared today. We're now ready for the last part of our program, which is the official launch of the new research repository. And we'll start with a short reveal video, and then Jane will tell us more about this new platform and what you can expect to find there. Thank you very much.
Back to you, Jane. That was just the first video. We'll play the second one after Jane's presentation.
Thank you. Okay, I was having challenges switching on my video. First, let me just join Tansy in thanking the panelists. That was a great panel, but for some reason, the reaction buttons are not working. So I am sure many people would have voted to clap. From the final part of the program today, I'm very pleased to introduce and officially launch the What Works for Youth Employment in Africa Research Repository, which is now live online. Joy has just shared with us the video counting down to that. This new platform, as I had alluded to earlier, is the result of the partnership between PEP and the Mastercard Foundation under the shared vision of expanding dignified and fulfilling work for young Africans. As I mentioned in the introduction, What Works for Youth Employment in Africa initiative, so teams of researchers and policymakers in 10 African countries carrying out detailed reviews of youth employment policies, examining designs, implementation, and impact. The repository is where all of this evidence comes together in one organized, accessible location. It hosts the full set of outputs from the country studies and highlights key policy messages. And we are very, very proud of this repository. What makes this platform distinct is the way the evidence has been produced. It is both deeply contextualized contextually grounded in national realities and comparable across countries, allowing users to identify patterns, contrast approaches, and understand how different policy environments shape results. For example, a government ministry reviewing its entrepreneurship program can quickly access its own country analysis, then see how other countries have approached similar challenges, whether in targeting, delivery mechanisms, or coordination. Likewise, a youth-focused NGO designing a new intervention can explore the policy briefs and scale measurement assessments to understand what implementation gaps exist and where their work could have the greatest impact. And that's why in that panel, you realize we had policymakers, we had youth, we had researchers, we had everyone represented. Our aim is simple but crucial: to provide governments, youth organizations, practitioners, development partners with a reliable body of knowledge they can use to design more efficient, scalable, and better targeted youth employment programs. We know labor markets are shifting quickly due to demographic pressure, economic uncertainty, and technological change, just as it was alluded by Lucas. Policymakers need timely, relevant, and credible evidence to guide decisions that are both equitable and forward-looking. This repository was designed with that in mind, because then we have all the information that we need in there. In a moment, we are going to play a short video to show you how to navigate the repository and its main features. Before we play the video, let me just emphasize that this platform is more than a place to store evidence. Our hope is that the repository will serve as a living resource that continues to inform conversations and influence policy and program design, even though the initiative itself has concluded. Maybe I would want to add there that even though the initiative has concluded, there could be adds-on, there could be lessons from what we have done, and we can further this work, and therefore we will continue building on the repository. Now, let's take a look at the short demonstration video so that we know how to navigate through the repository. Joy, please.
Created by the Partnership for Economic Policy PEP in partnership with the Mastercard Foundation, this open repository brings together the latest research and policy evidence on what works to create dignified and fulfilling work for young Africans. Watch this short video to see how simple it is to explore and access free youth employment policy evidence and resources, all designed to help policymakers, researchers, and practitioners drive meaningful change across Africa. On the homepage, you will find a short overview of the initiative and quick access to all available resources. Use the top menu or scroll down to start exploring by publication type, by country, or by action area. Select a country to view all the publications for that context. Each page includes a summary of key findings and downloadable resources, from working papers to policy briefs. You can also browse by publication type to focus on the materials that best suit your needs. For example, a policy brief for a quick summary of the policy recommendations, or the working papers to fully understand the methodology. All materials are free to access and downloadable as PDFs. Click the title link to access the publication. Each document includes details about research team, methods, and policy relevance. You can also explore the repository by action area, grouping studies by key policy teams such as coordination, program design, funding, entrepreneurship, and training. The What Works for Youth Employment in Africa repository is an evolving knowledge hub, connecting evidence, researchers and policymakers to scale what works.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joy. So participants, you see how easy it is, and we are going to have that video somewhere on the website next to the repository so that you can use it to navigate. But generally, I hope that this gives you a sense of how easy it is to navigate the repository, and of course, how variable its materials can be to your work. As you explore the repository further, you find not only the country reviews themselves, but also summaries and contextual information to help interpret the findings. We also hope that this will spark new research questions, new collaborations, and new discussions about what truly works for youth employment in Africa. And in the spirit of the Young Africa Work Strategy, we hope it contributes in a meaningful way to enabling millions of young Africans, especially women, to access dignified and fulfilling work. I encourage all of us to explore the repository, share it widely, and use it to support the important work you are doing for youth across the continent. Most important, give us feedback on areas that we could improve or add on. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Michael, to make some closing remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Hope I can be heard.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and before the closing remarks, sincere apologies from the team for taking a few more minutes from your time. Okay, thank you. So as we come to the end of today's webinar, I would like to extend my appreciation to everyone who has joined us, our authors and panelists, colleagues from government and policy institutions, organizations, international development partners, and Sorry for that. I'm having a few challenges here. So your engagement today reflects a shared commitment to strengthening youth employment policy in Africa. Before we formally close, let me take a moment to reflect on a few key takeaways from our discussions today. From Lucas' presentation earlier on, youth employment programs and policies receive insufficient resources that are often uncoordinated across government institutions. There is a poor targeting of vulnerable populations and lack of strong evaluation frameworks. Also from the panel discussion, that there is a need to emphasize the importance of bridging the gap between research and actionable policy. We also heard that we need to emphasize the importance of involving youth in the core design process for youth employment programs and policies. We also heard from our panelists that there is the silo approach, and there are various ways that we can use to address this, including creating interministerial committees, invite members from civil societies, academia, international organizations, among other partners. These insights reminds us why this work matters. They also affirm the importance of the What Works for Youth Employment in Africa initiative, an effort built on partnership, evidence, and a shared commitment to support African governments in designing more effective, scalable, and equitable youth employment policies. Today, we have celebrated two major achievements: the publication of youth employment programs in Africa and the launch of the What Works for Youth Employment in Africa research repository. Together, these outputs capture the spirit of the initiative: that is building the evidence needed to drive policy reform and ultimately help expand dignified and fulfilling work opportunities for young Africans, especially women and marginalized groups. I would like to extend heartfelt thanks to our editors and authors, whose dedication has produced a volume that will serve as a reference for researchers and policymakers alike. My thanks also go to our panelists who enriched today's discussions with their thoughtful reflections. And I want to acknowledge the extraordinary efforts of the local research teams and stakeholders across the 10 countries. Your work is the backbone of the book and the repository. We express our appreciation once again to the Mastercard Foundation, whose partnership and vision have been instrumental throughout this journey. Finally, thank you to all of us who joined, to all of you who joined us today. Your questions, comments, and presence today remind us that advancing youth employment in Africa is a collective endeavor, one that depends on continued dialogue, learning, and action across sectors and countries. Going forward, I hope that the book and the open repository will serve not only as sources of evidence, but as catalysts for innovation, collaboration, and better informed decision-making. The work we do together has the potential to shape more inclusive labor markets, strengthen opportunities for young people, and contribute to long-term prosperity. With that, I officially close today's webinar. Thank you for being part of this milestone, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.